December 26, 1944. The Ardennes Forest. Snow falls in thick, silent curtains over the skeletal remains of pine trees, their branches stripped bare by weeks of shelling. The ground trembles beneath the weight of steel treads as a German Panther tank commander, Oberleutnant Friedrich Weber, peers through his vision slit into the gray dawn. His breath forms small clouds in the frozen air inside the turret. Through the morning mist, he sees them, another column of American tanks rolling forward. Shermans. Always Shermans. He has destroyed 3 in the past week. Yet here come 5 more, their olive drab hulls pushing through the snow like patient, unstoppable machines. Weber's gunner whispers a question that has haunted every German tanker since Normandy. Wie viel haben sie noch? How many more do they have? The answer to that question would have seemed impossible to any soldier of the Wehrmacht, trained in the doctrines of quality over quantity, in the belief that superior engineering and tactical brilliance could overcome material disadvantage. The German armored forces had entered the war with this philosophy carved into their very identity. Their tanks, the Tigers, the Panthers, the legendary Panzers that had rolled across Poland and France, represented the pinnacle of engineering excellence. Each machine was a masterwork of German industrial craftsmanship, fitted with thick armor, powerful guns, and precision optics. These were not mere vehicles, they were extensions of Prussian military tradition, symbols of technological supremacy. When the first Panzers crushed through the Ardennes in 1940, they had validated this philosophy. Speed, shock, and superior machinery had brought France to its knees in 6 weeks. But December 1944 was not May 1940. The forest that had once witnessed German triumph now bore witness to a different kind of warfare, one that the Wehrmacht had never truly prepared for. Since the breakout from Normandy, German tank commanders had been filing reports that grew increasingly desperate in tone. The Americans, they noted, seemed to possess an inexhaustible supply of tanks. For every Sherman destroyed, 2 more appeared. Knock out 5, and 10 rolled forward to replace them. Intelligence officers in Berlin initially dismissed these reports as exaggeration, the pessimistic assessments of exhausted crews. But the numbers kept coming. After-action reports from Lorraine, from the Hurricane Forest, from every contested kilometer between Normandy and the German border told the same impossible story. The truth was more staggering than any German intelligence estimate had predicted. Between 1942 and 1945, American factories produced 49,234 Sherman tanks. 49,234. The number itself seemed to defy comprehension. To put this in perspective, Germany's entire wartime production of its most famous tank, the Panther, reached approximately 6,000 units. The fearsome Tiger tank, the machine that haunted Allied tankers' nightmares, numbered fewer than 1,400. The Americans had built more Shermans in a single year, 1943, than Germany produced of all its tank models combined during the entire war. Friedrich Weber did not know these numbers as he sat in his Panther that frozen December morning, but he knew the reality they represented. He had seen it with his own eyes, felt it in the grinding exhaustion that came from fighting an enemy who could afford to lose and lose and lose and still keep coming. Weber had been a tank commander since 1942. He had fought in Russia, where the endless horizons and brutal winters had first taught him the terrible mathematics of attrition. But Russia, for all its vastness and ferocity, had been different. The Soviets threw men and machines forward with savage disregard for losses, yes, but their tanks, the T-34s and KV-1s, were crude things, roughly finished, mechanically unreliable. They could be respected for their effectiveness, but they spoke of desperation, of an industrial base barely adequate to the task. The American abundance was something else entirely. The Shermans that Weber faced were not crude. They were not rough or barely functional. They were well-made machines, standardized to an extraordinary degree, maintained with rigorous attention, supplied with fuel and ammunition that never seemed to run short. When a Sherman broke down, and they did, like all machines of war, American recovery vehicles appeared within hours to tow it away. Within days, it would return to action repaired, or another would take its place. The Americans did not husband their tanks like precious jewels, did not throw them forward in desperate gambles. They used them with the casual confidence of men who knew that losses were temporary inconveniences, not catastrophes. This realization came slowly to the men of the Panzerwaffe, filtering through experience and bitter lessons. In Normandy, in the weeks after D-Day, German tank commanders had initially felt confident despite the tactical disadvantages of fighting in the bocage. Yes, they were outnumbered. Yes, Allied air superiority made daylight movement almost suicidal. But they had superior tanks. A Panther could kill a Sherman at ranges where the American tank's shells simply bounced off German armor. A single Tiger could hold off an entire American tank platoon, its 88mm gun capable of penetrating a Sherman's frontal armor at nearly a mile. In the first encounters, these advantages proved real. Shermans burned easily when penetrated, so easily that their crews called them Ronsons after the cigarette lighter company's slogan, "Lights first time, every time." But the Americans kept coming. Obersturmführer Karl-Heinz Wittmann, commander of a Tiger tank in the 1st SS Panzer Division, recorded his impressions in a letter to his brother in July 1944. "We have stopped their attack today. 7 of their tanks burn in the field before our position. We have not lost a single panzer. But tonight we must withdraw because we have no fuel to move and no ammunition for another engagement. Tomorrow they will attack again with new tanks, and we will not be here to stop them." This is how they fight, not with skill, but with an endless river of material that wears us down like water against stone. Wittmann's observation captured the essential paradox that German tankers faced. Tactically, in individual engagements, they often prevailed. German tanks were generally superior in armor and armament. German crews were on average better trained in the opening years of the war. But these tactical advantages dissolved in the acid of American industrial capacity. The Wehrmacht was fighting a form of warfare for which its entire military culture was unprepared, a war of logistics, production, and material abundance that rendered traditional virtues of individual skill and technical excellence increasingly irrelevant. The scale of American production was not merely about numbers. It represented a fundamental difference in how the two nations approached warfare. Germany's tank production was characterized by complexity and constant modification. Engineers could not resist improving designs, adding features, increasing armor thickness, upgrading guns. The Panther tank went through multiple variants, each with modifications that complicated logistics and maintenance. Parts from early Panthers often did not fit later models. Training on one variant did not fully prepare crews for another. This pursuit of perfection created formidable individual machines, but choked the supply chain and overburdened the maintenance system. By 1944, German armor divisions often had more tanks awaiting repairs than they had in combat-ready condition. The Americans took a radically different approach. The Sherman tank was far from perfect. Its armor was adequate, but not impressive. Its 75mm gun was outclassed by German tank weapons. It was tall, making an easier target. American tankers knew these limitations intimately and paid for them in blood. But the Sherman had one virtue that overshadowed all its defects. It could be mass-produced with extraordinary efficiency and maintained with remarkable ease. The design was standardized. Parts were interchangeable. Maintenance procedures were simple enough that crews could perform most repairs themselves. The logistics chain could keep them fueled, armed, and operational. And when they were destroyed, when they brewed up in flames or were torn apart by German shells, they could be replaced. This was the revelation that broke the spirit of the Panzerwaffe. Not the superiority of American tanks. German crews never conceded that. Not even the tactical situation or the crushing weight of Allied air power, though both played roles. What destroyed German morale was the slow, grinding realization that they were fighting an enemy for whom their tanks were disposable. Hauptmann Joseph Eberle, a Panther commander who surrendered in April 1945, described this feeling in his interrogation. "We knew we had the better tanks. We could prove it in every battle. But what does it matter if you kill 10 of their tanks when they have 100 more? What does it matter if your Panther can destroy 5 Shermans when the 6th one gets around your flank because you have no support, no fuel to reposition, no reserves to call upon? They fought us like a rich man who doesn't count his coins. We fought like beggars hoarding every pfennig." The psychological impact of facing this abundance extended beyond mere demoralization. It challenged the foundational myths of German military culture. The Wehrmacht had been built on the legend of qualitative superiority, the idea that German soldiers, German training, German equipment could overcome any numerical disadvantage. This belief had historical roots stretching back through Prussian military tradition, validated by the stunning victories of the war's opening years. To German tankers, their panzers were not just weapons, but symbols of this superiority, steel embodiments of German technical and military excellence. The Sherman represented something that German military culture had no framework to process, the triumph of adequacy multiplied by abundance. Each individual Sherman was not exceptional. It was simply good enough. Good enough to be reliable. Good enough to be produced in staggering numbers. Good enough to equip crews that could be trained in months rather than years. Good enough to be supplied anywhere American logistics reached. The Americans had created a system where good enough multiplied by 50,000 became an unstoppable force. This realization spread through the Panzerwaffe like a slow poison. In conversations recorded by Allied intelligence officers who monitored German prisoners of war, a common theme emerged. German tankers spoke with pride about their machines and their victories. They could recount in detail the engagements where they had destroyed multiple enemy tanks. But underlying this pride was a profound fatalism. They had seen the future of warfare, and in that future there was no place for them. Lieutenant Hermann Bix, captured in February 1945, put it bluntly, "We are knights fighting against factories, and the factories are winning." The symbolic weight of the Sherman in German consciousness went beyond military significance. To German soldiers, American material abundance represented something almost incomprehensible about the enemy they faced. Stories circulated through Wehrmacht units about American supply depots, about the casual waste of equipment, about soldiers who threw away items that German troops would have considered precious. A Panzer crewman captured in Lorraine told interrogators about watching American soldiers discard a Jeep with a flat tire rather than repair it. To him, this was almost obscene, a display of wealth so extreme it seemed immoral. Yet it was also terrifying. What kind of nation could afford to throw away vehicles? What kind of industrial system could treat even complex machines as disposable? The Sherman tank became the most visible symbol of this incomprehensible abundance. German tankers developed a complex relationship with their enemy's primary armored vehicle. On one level, they dismissed it as inferior, and by the standards of armor protection and gun power, it was. The Panther's 75mm gun could penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor at 2,000 meters. A Sherman needed to close to within 500 meters to have a reasonable chance of penetrating a Panther's frontal armor. In one-on-one duels, the outcome was rarely in doubt. German crews collected stories of their kills, took grim satisfaction in their technical superiority. But this superiority provided no comfort when 5 more Shermans appeared to avenge each destroyed tank. Nor did it help when German tanks sat immobilized for lack of fuel, while Shermans maneuvered freely, their logistics chain capable of delivering thousands of gallons of gasoline to the front. The Americans could afford to use their tanks aggressively, to take losses, to learn from mistakes because they knew replacements were already rolling off assembly lines in Detroit, in Philadelphia, in cities whose industrial capacity dwarfed Germany's entire manufacturing base. The numbers told a story that German tankers lived but could hardly believe. American factories were producing more than 2,000 Shermans every month at peak production. The Chrysler Tank Arsenal alone, a facility built specifically for Sherman production, was manufacturing 1 complete tank every hour during its most productive period. Every hour. By the time a German Panther destroyed 3 Shermans in a day's fighting, American factories had built 72 more. The mathematics of this equation allowed only one conclusion, and German tankers reached it long before their generals: the war was lost. This conclusion came with a particular bitterness. German tank crews took pride in their professionalism, their skill, their machines. They were not wrong to do so. A well-handled Panther or Tiger was a formidable weapon, and the men who crewed them were often veterans of years of brutal combat. But skill and quality, they learned, could not overcome the kind of material disparity they faced. Unteroffizier Wilhelm Rose, a Panzer IV gunner, captured this frustration in a diary entry from September 1944. "Today, I destroyed my 12th enemy tank. I should feel victorious. Instead, I feel like a man bailing water from a sinking ship with a teacup. No matter how fast I bail, the water rises higher." The recurring presence of the Sherman, its persistence, its ubiquity, wore down German morale in ways that more spectacular weapons could not. The Allies had other tanks, the British Cromwell and Churchill, the American Pershing that appeared late in the war. But it was the Sherman that German tankers saw everywhere, on every front, in every engagement. Its silhouette became as familiar as their own vehicles. Its mechanical sounds, the particular note of its engine, the rattle of its tracks, haunted German positions. The Sherman was not the most powerful tank in the Allied arsenal, but it was the tank that never went away, that always returned, that embodied the inexhaustible nature of American industrial might. Friedrich Weber, in his Panther in the Ardennes forest that December morning, understood this in his bones. He had fought since 1942. He had survived Russia, where the cold killed as efficiently as enemy fire. He had survived Normandy, where Allied fighter bombers turned daylight into a death sentence for armored vehicles. He was a survivor, a skilled commander, a veteran who knew his craft. His Panther was well maintained, its gun zeroed, its engine running smoothly despite the cold. He had every advantage except the one that mattered: numbers. As the American column approached through the snow, Weber went through his mental calculations with practiced efficiency. Range to target, ammunition available, escape routes if the position became untenable. He would engage because that was his duty. He would probably destroy several of the approaching Shermans because he was good at his job and his tank was superior. And then he would withdraw if he could to fight again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, until the arithmetic of attrition reached its inevitable conclusion. The transformation in German military thought that the Sherman represented extended beyond individual soldiers to the highest levels of strategic planning, though this recognition came far too late to matter. By 1944, even officers who had never seen combat understood that Germany's production capacity could never match Allied output. Albert Speer, Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production, performed miracles of organization to increase German manufacturing. Through rationalization, concentration of effort, and ruthless prioritization, he increased tank production dramatically from 1942 onward. In 1944, Germany produced more tanks than in any previous year of the war. Speer considered this his greatest achievement. But even at peak production, even with slave labor and complete mobilization of the economy, Germany built approximately 19,000 tanks of all types during 1944. In that same year, the United States produced over 17,000 tanks while simultaneously building tens of thousands of aircraft, hundreds of ships, millions of small arms, and supplying not just its own military but providing material to Britain, the Soviet Union, and other allies through Lend-Lease. The Americans were not diverting their entire economy to tank production. They were producing tanks almost as an afterthought while building everything else needed for a global war. This was the reality that German planners faced in their quietest, most honest moments. They were not really fighting the American military. They were fighting American industry, and that was a battle they had lost before the first shot was fired. The Sherman tank, in this context, was more than a weapon. It was a message. Every one that appeared on the battlefield carried an implicit communication from the American homeland to German soldiers. We can build these faster than you can destroy them. We have more factories, more workers, more steel, more rubber, more copper, more oil. We have an economy so vast that we can wage war on 3 continents simultaneously and still increase civilian living standards. You cannot win this war because you cannot outproduce us, and modern war is a contest of production as much as skill. German soldiers received this message clearly. In the thousands of letters sent home from the front that were intercepted and analyzed by Allied intelligence, a common theme emerged in late 1944 and early 1945, a sense that Germany was fighting not just an enemy, but an avalanche, a force of nature, an opponent whose resources were effectively infinite. One soldier wrote to his wife, "We fight well. We destroy their tanks. But they have so many that it doesn't matter. It's like trying to hold back the tide by throwing stones into the sea." This metaphor of natural forces, of overwhelming tides, recurred frequently in German descriptions of American material superiority. It reflected a psychological shift from viewing the Americans as a conventional military opponent to seeing them as something categorically different. The Soviets, for all their numbers and ferocity, remained comprehensible within traditional military frameworks. The Red Army was a mass army, poorly equipped by German standards, but dangerous through sheer weight. The Americans represented something outside this framework, an enemy who combined technological sophistication with Soviet-level abundance, who could afford to be wasteful because their production capacity made waste irrelevant. The Sherman embodied this incomprehensible combination. It was not a crude weapon thrown together from inadequate materials. It was a well-engineered machine designed for efficient production but not lacking in sophistication. Its mechanical reliability was actually superior to many German tanks. Its transmission was more durable than the Panther's notorious final drive, which had a distressing tendency to fail. Its engine was less powerful than German designs, but far more reliable and easier to maintain. When a Sherman broke down, which happened less frequently than with comparable German tanks, it could be repaired quickly with readily available parts. The Americans had optimized not for individual tank performance, but for system performance. And in war, system performance was what mattered. The irony was not lost on thoughtful German officers. Germany had pioneered modern armored warfare. Heinz Guderian, Erwin Rommel, Erich von Manstein, these names were synonymous with panzer tactics and operational brilliance. German military theorists had written the book on how to use tanks decisively. But the Americans had written a different book, one focused not on tactical employment, but on industrial leverage. They had understood, perhaps instinctively, what the Germans had missed, that in total war, the factory was as important as the battlefield, and victory went to the side that could sustain production longer, not to the side with the most elegant weapons.